Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
So we are diving into a really specific historical scenario today.
Right, and it is part of our Caucasian history series.
Exactly. You are looking at a situation where individuals are taken from their mountain villages, trafficked across an entire sea, and sold into a completely foreign military system.
And they are totally separated from their families, their land, their native language.
The standard historical outcome for that kind of scenario is usually assimilation, or just complete erasure from the historical record.
But not in this specific case. We are looking at a group that did not just survive that trafficking system, but they systematically mastered it.
They seized control of the very empire that bought them.
And they established a dynasty that ruled from Cairo over the Middle East for over a century.
It is a profound historical paradox, really. A group of people who are stateless, yet they simultaneously become the supreme imperial rulers of a completely foreign domain.
And we are, of course, talking about the Circassians.
Yes. To understand the geopolitics of the Caucasus, and arguably large portions of Middle Eastern history, you have to understand this specific group.
We have a wide stack of sources on the table for this deep dive. We are pulling from historical texts, political analyses, cultural encyclopedias, and a lot of archaeological records.
Because the mission here is to trace the continuous thread of Circassian identity.
Right, starting from the ancient archaeological cultures of the Caucasus Mountains, going through those medieval courts of Egypt, through a century-long war with the Russian Empire, all the way to their reality today.
And today, they are a predominantly diaspora nation.
So let us start right at the foundation. Who are the Circassians before the empires and all the major conflicts enter the record?
Even the name we use requires a bit of clarification. Because, they do not call themselves Circassians.
Right, that is an outside label.
Exactly. The term Circassian, or Cherkess, is an exonym. It is a label applied by external observers.
Where does it come from?
The origins of the word are Turkic. The historical consensus ties it to the era of the Mongol Golden Horde, so roughly around the 13th century.
Ah, I see.
And as outside powers interacted with the region, that Turkic term was adopted into Russian, and eventually it was Latinized into the English word we use today.
But internally, they use an endonym.
They do. They refer to themselves as the Adyghe.
And the land itself.
The historical homeland is known as Adyghe Khabze, which translates directly to Adyghe's land.
So it establishes this immediate linguistic connection between the identity of the people and the physical geography of the North Caucasus.
It is a very dense linguistic connection, too.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up. Looking at the linguistic section of these sources, they belong to the Northwest Caucasian language family.
Which is completely separate from Indo-European languages or Turkic languages.
And mechanically, the Adyghe language operates in a way that is highly unusual.
It is characterized by an extreme consonant inventory and, well, a severe scarcity of vowels.
It's just how many consonants are we talking about here?
Depending on the specific dialect, the I language utilizes up to 58 distinct consonants.
Wait, 58? Walk through how that physically works.
Yeah.
That requires a level of vocal manipulation that most languages never demand.
It does. It requires utilizing entirely different parts of the vocal tract. The language features a really high number of ejective consonants.
Ejectives.
Right. So in a standard language, sound is produced by pushing air from the lungs outward. Ejectives are different.
How so?
They are produced by manipulating air pressure entirely within the mouth and throat, completely independently of the lungs.
Oh, interesting.
The speaker closes their vocal cords, raises the larynx to compress the air, and then releases it. It creates a sharp, distinct popping sound.
And alongside the ejectives, the sources mention uvular sounds?
Yes, sounds produced much further back in the throat, near the uvula.
So when you combine these complex consonants, the ejectives, the uvulars, the pharyngeals, and you strip away most of the vowels that normally act as bridges between sounds,
you get a language of immense density and real acoustic distinctiveness.
when a language develops this level of complexity and actually retains it, what does that tell us about the history of the people speaking it?
Well, languages usually simplify when they mix with other populations. So this linguistic conservatism points directly to deep in situ development.
Meaning they stayed in one place.
Exactly. The people developing this language were not constantly churning and mixing with the massive population replacements happening out on the plains of Eurasia.
They were somewhat insulated.
They developed over millennia in the highly rugged, vertically stratified terrain of the Caucasus Mountains. The geography acted as a buffer.
So the language grew inward, becoming more complex rather than diluting through trade and migration.
Precisely. And the oral tradition factor is crucial here too.
Because they did not have a written script.
The Adyghe culture preserved its history, its legal codes, and its societal norms entirely without a written script until the 19th century.
Every law, every lineage, every myth had to be committed to memory and passed down verbally.
And when we look at the physical evidence of that in situ development, the archaeological records align perfectly with the linguistic isolation.
Right, we can trace an unbroken line of habitation back thousands of years. The sources identify the Maotian culture to start with.
Yes, the Maotian culture dates from the 8th to the 7th century BCE.
And they were agriculturalists and fishers, situated around the Sea of Azov and the Kuban River basin.
Correct. And following them, we see the rise of the Scythian civilization in the 5th century BCE.
The Scythian civilization provides a pretty concrete look at their societal structure.
They were centered in a region known as Syndica, which is near what is now Anapa on the Black Sea coast, and they were building actual urban settlements.
The sources mention the city of Gorgipia as a prime example.
The archaeological excavations at Gorgipia reveal a society that was highly structured.
And they found coins, right?
Rare coins minted by the Scythians that feature the image of Hercules.
See, that is interesting to me. If they are minting coins with Hercules on them, they're clearly interacting with Greek colonists.
Very much so.
But that challenges the idea that they were completely shut off from the world in their mountain valleys.
It creates a nuanced picture. They were geographically protected, which allowed them to maintain their distinct indigenous traditions. But they were simultaneously integrated into ancient global trade networks along the coast.
It is a balance.
The burial mounds in the Republic of Adyghe, known as kurgans, demonstrate this duality perfectly.
What specifically are archaeologists pulling out of those kurgans?
Inside these high-status burials, they find gold rhyta.
Which are the ceremonial drinking horns?
Right, highly ornate, often shaped like animal heads. But alongside these indigenous status symbols, they uncover Roman amphorae and imported luxury goods from Greece and Persia.
That shows a society selectively adopting the material wealth of the outside world without compromising its internal cultural structure.
Exactly. And when we transition from the artifacts in the ground to the actual genetics of the people, the in situ theory becomes even firmer.
The genetic markers isolate them completely from the migrations happening around them.
The genetic data in our sources focuses on the Y chromosome haplogroup G2A. Specifically, the subclade identified is G2A3B1P303.
Explain what that specific marker signifies in the context of human migration.
This haplogroup is considered a signature of the early indigenous populations of the Caucasus region.
So it's very old.
It predates the arrival of Indo-European speakers, and it predates the arrival of Turkic groups.
And the concentration is really high in certain groups, right?
In certain modern Circassian subgroups, such as the Shapsug, this specific genetic marker reaches frequencies of up to 86%.
86%. That is a staggering concentration.
It confirms severe genetic isolation and continuity.
It essentially proves that the ancestral population of the Adyghe did not migrate into the Caucasus recently.
They have been there since antiquity, continuously reproducing within their own distinct cultural boundaries.
Here's where I want to look at the larger map and pose a question for you. You have this population developing an incredibly deep, unbroken genetic and linguistic lineage, but just to the north of the Caucasus Mountains lies the Eurasian steppe. And that steppe was essentially the ancient world's superhighway for highly mobile, aggressive, nomadic empires.
You have the Scythians, the Sarmatians, the Huns.
Exactly. How does a settled agricultural society maintain its distinctiveness when it is bordering a massive migration route?
Well, geography provides the initial defense.
Because of the mountains.
Right. Steppe cavalry relies on vast open plains to execute their maneuvers. Moving a massive nomadic horde into the narrow gorges and heavily forested foothills of the North Caucasus neutralizes their primary tactical advantage.
The terrain fragments large armies.
But terrain alone is passive. A mountain range cannot fight off a determined empire forever.
Which brings us to the active defense.
The social structure. To survive centuries of proximity to aggressive external forces, the internal society must be rigidly organized.
It has to be deeply disciplined.
And completely unified by a common ethos. There can be no internal fracture for an outside power to exploit.
And for the Adyghe, that unifying ethos is deeply rooted in their pre-Islamic mythology.
Before the widespread adoption of Christianity and centuries before the adoption of Islam, They maintained a complex pagan belief system.
At the top of this pantheon was a supreme creator deity named Thoshku.
But the daily moral and cultural framework was primarily dictated by the Nart sagas.
The Nart sagas are the epic oral tales of the North Caucasus.
They center on a race of semi-divine heroes called the Narts. The cosmology in these sagas describes a universe stratified into 9 distinct realms.
And these tales are not just entertainment, right?
They are highly instructional. They emphasize themes of extreme bravery, cunning against impossible odds, and a deep symbiotic connection with the natural world, particularly horses in the forest.
When you have a society rooted in the soil, speaking a unique language and passing down these epic tales of resilience, you build a very specific type of culture.
You do.
But to manage the daily operations of that culture, to keep people disciplined enough to survive the threat of the steppe, you need rules. You need a system of governance.
Which leads directly into the core mechanism of their society, the Adyghe Khabze.
The sources refer to the Khabze as an unwritten constitution.
It is the moral code, the etiquette, and the law, all rolled into one system.
Let us look at the etymology of the word.
It breaks down its function perfectly. It derives from 2 roots, ka, which translates to society or human mass, and bonais, which translates to language or mechanism.
So, the language of society.
Exactly. It dictates how the society speaks to itself, how it regulates behavior, and how it resolves conflict.
And the ultimate goal for any individual within this system is to achieve a state of being called Adyghe.
Which can be translated as Circassianity.
But Adyghe is not a vague philosophical concept. The Khabze defines it through 5 rigid pillars.
Right. The first pillar is humanity, known as Sifie. The second is dignity, or namis.
Then you have reason, which is Adi.
The fourth is courage, tlae. And the fifth is honor, nape.
A failure to uphold any one of those pillars means a failure to be considered a true Adyghe.
It is a very strict standard.
Let us translate this into daily life. How did this actualize in physical space? Because the Khabze involves a complex system of proxemics, or spatial behavior.
Directional honor is a major component of the Khabze. Physical space is not neutral for them, it is hierarchical.
Give an example of that.
Well, the direction of the south, which generally points toward the highest peaks of mountains, is traditionally considered the place of honor.
So if a group of people is standing together and someone approaches from the south, what happens?
That person is acknowledged and greeted first, regardless of other status markers.
And the right side is always the honorable side.
Always. If 2 men are walking together, the younger man must stay to the left, allowing the elder to occupy the right.
What about a man and a woman?
If a man and a woman are walking together, the woman is granted the honorable position on the right. This is non-negotiable.
Consider a group of people walking into a home for a gathering. How does the Khabze organize that room?
The seating arrangement is instantly calculated by everyone present. In any room, the seat located furthest from the door is designated as the place of highest honor.
And who gets that seat?
That seat belongs strictly to the most respected or eldest person present, who holds the title of the thamate.
The thamate is essentially the elder or the toastmaster.
The supreme authority in that specific social setting.
And where do the younger people sit?
The younger individuals, or those of lesser status, will always position themselves near the door or by the hearth.
Why near the door?
This ensures that in the event of an attack or an emergency, the youth are positioned to act first and protect the elders.
The mechanics of this raise an immediate question. We are talking about a society with no written laws and no formal police force.
Right.
How does an unwritten constitution survive for thousands of years without an institutional enforcement mechanism?
The enforcement mechanism was the community itself, guided by a specialized class of individuals known as the Jigwako.
These are the court poets and singers.
They functioned as the guardians of the Khabze. The Jigwako held a highly specialized and deeply respected role.
And they were bound by strict rules regarding what they could sing.
According to the code, they were required to sing the absolute truth. They were completely immune to political pressure.
Meaning they could not be bought.
They could not falsely elevate the reputation of a favored prince, nor could they diminish the genuine bravery of a bitter enemy.
The best way to understand the Khabze is to look at it like a societal biological immune system. It runs constantly in the background.
That is a good way to frame it.
Its primary function is to identify and neutralize toxic elements, whether that is a despotic leader, an act of cowardice, or extreme selfishness, long before those elements can infect the entire social body.
It ruthlessly prioritizes communal survival over individual ambition.
And the Jigwako act within that immune system.
They were the white blood cells of the legal system, essentially. Right. The Khabze was explicitly designed to prevent despotism. Even the highest-ranking prince was subordinate to the Khabze.
Because true legal authority rested with the collective will of the people, interpreted by the famate.
We also see this communal prioritization in the rules of Sape.
Sape is the mandate of charity.
But the critical distinction in the Khabze is that this charity must be executed entirely without the expectation of reward, repayment, or even gratitude.
So no strings attached.
If you expect a favor in return, it is no longer Sape, it is a transaction. True Sape is an obligation you owe to the overall health of the community.
Let us construct a scenario to show how the Jigwako actually enforced these laws.
Okay.
You are looking at a highly respected Circassian warrior who is accused of cowardice during a raid, or maybe a prince is accused of violating the rights of a commoner. There are no courts to file a lawsuit.
The dispute is brought to the public sphere. The Jigwako, having observed the events or gathered the testimonies, would compose a song.
And because they were bound by the absolute truth of the Khabze, their lyrical account became the definitive record of the event.
It is musical jurisprudence.
Musical jurisprudence, I like that term.
If the Jigwako sang a truthful song detailing a warrior's innocence, that song would officially purify the warrior's reputation across the entire region.
And if it was a song of condemnation?
A song of condemnation from a Jigwako was a social death sentence. No prince, no matter how wealthy, wanted a song of their dishonor echoing through the valleys for generations.
This level of intense societal discipline creates a very specific byproduct.
It does.
When every individual is conditioned from birth to suppress overt emotion, to endure pain stoically, and to place honor above life, you are essentially breeding a nation of elite warriors.
The martial conditioning was absolute. And because of their geographic location, wedged between expanding empires, that martial conditioning became their primary export.
It became their most famous trait on the global stage.
Which transitions us nicely from the valleys of the Caucasus into the medieval political arena.
The first major recorded clash highlighting this martial prowess happens around the year 1022.
We see a major conflict between the rising power of the Rus and the Circassians. The Russian prince Mstislav of Tumturakan engages the Circassian forces.
And the Circassians are led by a giant of a man named Prince Adyghe.
And rather than a full-scale slaughter, they opt for a duel to settle the engagement. It reads just like one of the ancient Nart sagas.
A champion versus champion combat.
Exactly. The physical mechanics of the duel favored Adyghe. According to the Russian chronicles, Mstislav was losing the physical wrestling match.
He was being forced down into the mud.
The chronicle states that in his desperation, Mstislav prayed, making a pact with the Virgin Mary, or, in darker folk versions, a pact with the devil promising to build a grand church if he was granted the strength to win.
So he manages to draw a hidden knife, or finds a surge of strength, and he slays Adyghe.
Mstislav wins the duel and establishes the Tumturakan Principality on the edge of Circassian territory.
But that is not the end of the story for the Circassians.
No, the broader historical reality is that the Circassians simply absorbed the loss of a leader, reorganized, and waged a long-term campaign against Tumturakan.
They eventually ground the principality down, destroyed it entirely, and reclaimed the territory.
This reputation as relentless, highly disciplined fighters spread rapidly, and by the 13th and 14th centuries, it caught the attention of European merchants.
Specifically, the Genoese.
The Genoese Republic had established a string of lucrative trading colonies along the Black Sea coast. They traded in grain, salt, and manufactured goods.
But their most valuable commodity was human beings.
They facilitated a massive export of Circassian slaves.
But we have to clarify the nature of this slavery, because it really challenges the conventional understanding of the transatlantic slave trade.
It is very different.
These individuals were not being exported to work on plantations or perform agricultural labor.
No, they were military slaves. The market for this specific type of enslaved person was primarily situated in Egypt and the broader Islamic world.
The buyers were rulers who needed elite, highly trained soldiers.
These military slaves were known as Mamluks.
The word Mamluk literally means one who is owned.
The Mamluk system is one of the most structurally fascinating military frameworks in history.
Walk us through how it worked.
An empire imports young boys from foreign lands, converts them to Islam, and subjects them to years of rigorous, isolated military training.
The logic for the ruler is pretty clear. If I build an army of local citizens, they have families, they have tribal loyalties, and they might overthrow me to support their own kin.
Right.
But if I buy orphans from a mountain range thousands of miles away, they have no local ties. Their only loyalty will be to me, their owner.
That is the theory. The practice, however, revealed a fatal flaw in the design.
What happens?
When you fill your entire military apparatus with foreign slaves, and you give them the best weapons, the best horses, and the best training, they eventually realize a fundamental truth.
Which is,
They possess all the physical power in the empire.
they realize they do not need to take orders from the ruler. They can simply depose the ruler and run the empire themselves.
And that is precisely what happened in Egypt. The Mamluks overthrew their Ayyubid masters and established their own sultanate.
And by the late 14th century, the demographics of the Mamluk elite in Cairo had shifted heavily toward the Circassians.
In 1382, a Circassian Mamluk named Al-Malika Zakir Barkuk al-Jakezi seizes the throne.
Sultan Barquq establishes the Burji dynasty.
The term Burji translates to "of the tower." This refers to the massive stone barracks located within the citadel of Cairo, where the Circassian Mamluks were garrisoned.
From this tower, the Burji dynasty ruled Egypt, the Levant, and the Hejaz.
They control the holy cities of Mecca and Medina.
And they maintained this control for over 130 years, right up until the Ottoman conquest in 1517.
The mechanics of their rule are deeply layered. You have a Circassian elite ruling over an Arabic-speaking native Egyptian population.
Yet, the ruling class did not assimilate into the local culture.
They maintained a strict ethnic separation. The Burji Mamluks primarily spoke Kipchak Turkish, which served as the lingua franca of the military barracks.
And they continued to speak Circassian among themselves.
They sustained their numbers by continuously purchasing and importing more Circassian youths from the Black Sea coast.
How does an individual survive that psychological trauma? You are kidnapped as a child, trafficked across the Mediterranean, and thrown into a brutal military camp in Cairo.
It is incredibly brutal.
How do these individuals maintain such fierce ethnic solidarity and avoid psychological collapse when they are entirely severed from the Adyghe Khabze?
They survived by adapting the strict discipline of the Khabze to the reality of the barracks. Because they were severed from their biological families, they utilized a system known as Adyghe Khabze.
Break down how Adyghe Khabze functioned.
It's a system of fosterage and artificial kinship. In the Caucasus, noble families would often give their newborn children to lower-ranking families to be raised.
To create bonds.
Exactly. It created deep, unbreakable bonds across different social strata. In the Mamluk barracks, this concept was adapted to create intense artificial families.
So your master became your father.
And your fellow recruits, bought in the same batch, became your brothers.
You rely on the men standing next to you because they are literally the only family you have in the world.
The loyalty within these artificial cohorts was absolute. And because the Burji dynasty constantly needed fresh recruits to maintain their power in Cairo, the politics of Egypt became directly tethered to the politics of the Caucasus.
The demand for human resources in the Middle East starts altering the societal structure back home.
Precisely. To facilitate the steady export of young warriors, the loose tribal unions of the Northwest Caucasus began to centralize.
They had to organize the trade.
The need to organize and manage this lucrative, albeit grim trade, accelerated the development of more structured, hierarchical principalities in Circassia.
While they were organizing back home, the Mamluks were leaving a massive footprint in the Middle East.
If you go to Cairo today, the architectural legacy is still visible.
The Mosque Madrasa of Sultan Barquq stands as a monument to their wealth and engineering capability.
But their military legacy is even more significant. These Circassian cavalrymen, fighting thousands of miles from their ancestral mountains, acted as the primary shield of the Islamic world during a period of massive upheaval.
They were the forces that successfully repelled the later Crusader incursions.
And crucially, they halted the western advance of the Turco-Mongol conqueror Tamerlane.
Let us shift the focus back to the homeland. The elite are running an empire in Egypt, and back in the Caucasus, the push towards centralization produces what is often considered the golden age of Kabarda.
In the 15th century, a highly significant political figure emerges, Prince Inal the Great.
His reign is estimated to span from 1427 to 1453.
Prince Inal manages to achieve what the rugged geography usually prevents: unification.
He consolidated power over a vast territory, bringing various fragmented tribes under a single administrative umbrella.
But his legacy is not just military conquest, it is institutionalization.
He implemented a structured legal system based on the traditional code.
He established a network of 40 judges across his realm. He formally codified the unwritten Khabze, ensuring it was applied uniformly to settle disputes, manage resources, and maintain military readiness.
So by organizing the internal mechanisms of the society, he laid the permanent foundation for the Principality of Kabarda.
Which would become the dominant political entity in the region.
By the 16th century, Kabarda is powerful, but its geopolitical position is precarious. They are surrounded by formidable enemies.
To the west, you have the Crimean Tatars, who are constantly launching slaving raids.
And to the east, you have the Shamkal of Dagestan.
The ruler of Kabarda during this period is Prince Temriu Idar. He recognizes that the internal strength of Kabarda is not enough to fight a two-front war against the Tatars and the forces of Dagestan.
He needs a strategic counterweight.
He looks to the north, where a new, rapidly expanding power is consolidating its own territory, the Tsardom of Russia.
Temriuk makes a calculated diplomatic move. He seeks a military alliance with the Russian Tsar, Ivan IV, who is widely known to history as Ivan the Terrible.
This alliance is not just a piece of paper. In 1561, the political treaty is sealed with a royal marriage.
Ivan IV marries Temruk's daughter.
Her Circassian name was Gwashny, but upon arriving in Moscow and converting to Orthodoxy, she was baptized as Maria Temrukovna.
The marriage physically intertwines the ruling houses of Kabarda and Russia.
It provides Temruk with the military backing he needs to secure his borders against the Tatars, and it provides Ivan with a foothold and a powerful ally in the volatile Caucasus region.
And Maria does not go to Moscow alone. Her brother, Mikhail, accompanies her and integrates himself deeply into the Russian power structure.
Mikhail became a prominent and feared figure at the Russian court. He served as a leading commander in the Oprichnina, which was Ivan IV's brutal personal secret police force.
Here we have to pause and look at how this specific marriage, this alliance in 1561, has been interpreted by later historians because it becomes highly politicized.
We really must rely strictly on the source material to impartially examine the historiography of this event. How a 16th century marriage is remembered is just as important as the marriage itself.
In 1957, the Soviet Union erected a massive bronze monument in the city of Nauchik, which is the capital of the Kabardino-Balkarian Republic.
The statue depicts Maria.
And the monument officially celebrates the 400th anniversary of the voluntary union between Kabarda and Russia.
The historical narrative promoted by the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union framed Temruk's actions as a definitive, permanent submission.
The official narrative was that the Circassian people voluntarily sought Russian tutelage,
essentially pleading to be incorporated into the Russian state to be saved from the existential threats of the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean Tatars.
But when you cross-reference that with contemporary academic analysis and Circassian historical records, the mechanics of the event do not support a voluntary union.
The historical reality is that Temruk's treaty was a pragmatic, temporary military alliance forged between two sovereign powers acting as equals.
And Temruk did not even have the unanimous backing of the Adyghe people.
No, his authority over the entirety of Circassia was tenuous at best, and many other influential Circassian princes violently contested his alliance with Moscow.
It is a fascinating look at the mechanics of state-sponsored historical memory. You have a localized, highly contested military alliance sealed by a marriage in 1561.
And centuries later, 20th century authorities retroactively classified that single diplomatic maneuver as a permanent, unanimous national submission.
It is a way of using a selective reading of history to provide geopolitical legitimation for modern borders.
The statue of Maria the Nelchik serves as a physical manifestation of that retroactive classification. It anchors the modern political reality in a specific interpretation of the past.
And the folklore surrounding Maria in Moscow during her actual lifetime highlights just how alien this alliance felt to the Russian populace. She was not universally embraced.
She was viewed with intense suspicion by many within the Russian nobility and the Orthodox clergy. The cultural gap was immense.
There were persistent rumors at court that Maria was responsible for designing the terrifying insignia used by the Oprichnina.
The riders of the Oprichnina carried a severed dove's head and a broom attached to their saddles.
The symbolism was meant to indicate that they would sniff out treason like a dog and sweep it from the realm.
The historical sources suggest that this grotesque imagery may have been directly inspired by Kabardian pagan folklore.
Oh, really?
Specifically, there were ancient tales in the Caucasus of malevolent witches who rode upon dogs and strewed disease and misfortune across households.
So because of her foreign origins and her brother's role in the secret police, Maria's detractors frequently accused her of practicing witchcraft and manipulating the Tsar's already volatile temperament.
Before we examine how this alliance eventually shattered, leading to a century of total war, we really need to understand the physical tools and the cultural conditioning that defined a Circassian warrior during this peak era.
Because the reality of living in a constant state of military readiness profoundly shaped every aspect of their material culture.
The most iconic piece of that material culture is the sword, the shashka.
The word derives from the Adyghe term sase, which translates simply to long knife.
The shashka is widely considered a masterpiece of cavalry weapon design.
Mechanically, what makes it so distinct from a standard European broadsword or a standard saber?
The first thing you notice is the hilt. The shashka has no crossguard to protect the hand. It is a single-edged blade with a slightly curved profile.
But the most critical mechanical feature is how it is carried.
Right. Unlike a traditional sword, which hangs from the waist with the curve facing down, the shashka is suspended from a shoulder strap,
Resting almost horizontally.
with the cutting edge facing upward.
Wait, carrying a razor-sharp blade suspended with the edge facing up toward your own arm seems incredibly counterintuitive. What is the tactical advantage of doing that?
It alters the physics of the initial strike. With a standard sword, you must perform two distinct motions. You draw the blade from the scabbard, bring it to a ready position, and then you swing.
Right.
When the shashka is worn edge up, the warrior reaches across his body, grips the handle, and pulls it forward and down in one single fluid continuous arc.
So the draw and the strike become the exact same motion.
Precisely. In the context of light cavalry warfare, where engagements are decided in fractions of a second during a high-speed charge, eliminating that second motion provides a fatal advantage.
And the lack of a handguard.
The lack of a handguard reduces the weight, allowing the balance of the blade to shift entirely toward the tip, maximizing the kinetic energy of a downward slashing motion.
It is a weapon engineered specifically for the hit-and-run cavalry tactics dictated by the geography of the North Caucasus.
And what about defensive equipment?
They utilized tall, conic iron helmets that deflected downward blows.
But their most prized defensive asset was the mail hauberk. The metallurgy and craftsmanship of Circassian chainmail were legendary.
A single shirt could consist of 20 to 25,000 individually riveted metal rings.
The labor required to forge, interlock, and rivet 25,000 tiny iron rings is immense.
The quality was so renowned across the region that the Ottoman Empire frequently demanded these mail hauberks as a form of tribute from the Circassian tribes.
The clothing they wore under the armor was equally specialized for combat. The traditional male attire is the Cherkeska coat.
The defining feature of the Cherkeska is the row of small pockets sewn directly across the chest, which holds cylindrical tubes called gaziri.
Explain the function of the gaziri, because they look purely ornamental today.
Originally, they were strictly functional. With the advent of firearms, reloading a musket on horseback while moving at full speed was a complex and dangerous task.
Right.
The gaziri were bone or wooden tubes that held exactly one pre-measured charge of gunpowder and a musket ball.
They were capped tightly to keep the powder dry in the damp mountain weather.
Having them strapped to the chest allowed a rider to reach up, bite the cap off, and pour the exact charge down the barrel in seconds.
The design of the shashka and the Cherkeska was so mechanically superior for cavalry warfare that their primary enemies eventually copied it entirely.
The Russian Cossack forces, who spent generations fighting the Circassians, systematically adopted the shashka as their standard issue sword and the Cherkeska as their uniform.
But the militarization of the society went far beyond metallurgy and tailoring. It was physically ingrained into the population through their art, specifically through dance.
Circassian dance is not just a form of entertainment at a wedding. It is a rigorous system of physical and psychological conditioning.
It is essentially martial arts training disguised as choreography. The dances required immense endurance, balance, and spatial awareness.
Look at the kefenyer, which is the traditional competition dance. Describe the physical mechanics of what the dancer is doing.
The visual intensity is striking. A single male dancer leaps into the center of a circle. The choreography consists of extremely rapid small jumps.
And they are on their toes, right?
Crucially, The dancer executes these movements on turned-in toes, wearing soft leather boots with no reinforced toe box.
They are essentially doing point work, like a ballet dancer, but without the structural support of a hard shoe.
The physical stress on the metatarsals and the calf muscles is immense. It builds the exact muscle groups required for gripping the flanks of a horse and moving lightly over treacherous, rocky terrain.
And their hands are strictly controlled during this.
The hands are held rigidly behind the back or tucked tightly to the sides. They perform a specific movement called the zakladka.
What's that look like?
The dancer rapidly drops their weight, twisting their torso and weaving their head. It is quite literally a simulation of dodging a sword strike or a spear thrust while maintaining perfect lower body balance.
The psychological component of the dance ties directly back to the Khabze.
The Khabze dictates emotional stoicism. Even while performing these physically agonizing movements on the tips of their toes, the dancer's face must remain completely relaxed.
Showing no overt emotion, no pain, and no fatigue.
The aristocratic dances elevate this even further.
In noble dances like the kaffa, the emphasis is on a slow, gliding grace.
In some historical variations of these aristocratic performances, female dancers would perform elevated on wooden stilts, requiring absolute mastery of balance, and emphasizing the grandeur and unhurried dignity required of the nobility.
Every movement, every weapon, and every societal rule was optimized for survival, and they would need every single piece of that conditioning.
Because the pragmatic alliance forged by Temrok and Ivan IV eventually crumbles.
The geopolitical chessboard shifts, and the North Caucasus becomes the focal point of a massive imperial collision.
We enter the darkest chapter of this historical narrative, the Russo-Circassian War.
This conflict stands from July 1763 all the way to May 1864.
101 years of continuous warfare. It remains the longest war in the history of the Caucasus and the longest war in the history of the Russian Empire.
To understand why a war lasts a century, we have to look at the geopolitical motivations driving the Russian Empire southward. This is not just a border dispute.
It was driven by the broader geopolitical struggle known as the Eastern Question.
The Russian Empire was rapidly expanding its borders and modernizing its economy.
To compete globally, particularly against British naval hegemony and the Ottoman Empire, Russia needed secure, warm-water ports on the Black Sea coast.
They needed locations to build massive shipyards to project naval power into the Mediterranean.
And Circassia occupies the exact coastline Russia needs. The fertile valleys of the Kuban River and the ports along the Black Sea are directly in the path of imperial expansion.
The conflict officially ignites in 1763.
The catalyst was the construction of the Russian military fortress of Mozdok in eastern Circassia.
It was a clear, permanent encroachment onto sovereign territory.
And the Circassians responded with military force to destroy the garrison.
The nature of this war is fiercely asymmetrical. On one side, you have the industrialized, highly centralized military machine of the Russian Empire,
Capable of continually drafting thousands of soldiers and deploying modern artillery.
On the other side, you have a decentralized alliance of mountain tribes.
The Circassians could not field a standing, organized infantry to meet the Russian army in pitched battles.
Instead, they utilized their deep knowledge of the geography.
They employed sophisticated guerrilla tactics, launching devastating high-speed cavalry raids against Russian supply lines and fortresses, and then dissolving back into the impenetrable forests and mountain gorges before a counterattack could be organized.
The Russian high command realizes that they cannot win this war by chasing mountain cavalry through the ravines.
Commanders like General Alexei Yermolov, Mikhail Vorontsov, and later Alexander Beryatinsky recognized that fighting the Circassians on their own terms was an exercise in futility.
The terrain negated Russian artillery, and the heavily forested valleys provided endless cover for ambushes.
So they changed the underlying strategy of the war. They stopped trying to defeat the military and started attacking the environment that sustained the military.
They instituted a systematic policy of attrition and scorched earth.
Rather than hunting war parties, the Russian army focused on destroying the agricultural base. They systematically burned crops, slaughtered livestock, and razed entire villages to the ground.
Furthermore, they engaged in massive deforestation operations, clearing wide swaths of the ancient forests to physically deny the Circassians cover and to build roads for their artillery.
Try to comprehend the societal impact of a war that lasts 101 years. That is 4 generations of human beings born into a state of total existential conflict.
An entire society must reorient itself around sheer survival.
And because it was an oral culture without a centralized bureaucracy, the loss of elders and community leaders to violence or starvation meant the permanent loss of historical knowledge and legal precedent.
The cultural fabric was being systematically shredded.
Despite the guerrilla successes, the demographic and industrial weight of the Russian Empire is overwhelming. By 1860, the situation is critical.
The traditional tactics are failing against the scorched earth campaign. The various tribes realize they have to attempt something radically different.
In a final, desperate effort, leaders from the Avadzek, Shapsug, and Ubik tribes convened a national assembly in the coastal region of Sochi in 1860.
What were they trying to achieve at this assembly?
They recognized that military victory was no longer possible. Their goal was to unify their fragmented political structure and form a single, centralized parliament.
They believed that if they presented themselves as a unified modern state, they could successfully appeal to Western European powers, specifically Great Britain and France, for diplomatic recognition and military intervention.
It is a profound, tragic intersection of history. You have an ancient indigenous society based on an unwritten moral code attempting to rapidly adopt the mechanisms of modern international diplomacy to save themselves from annihilation.
They drafted petitions, they sent envoys to the Ottoman Sultan and to Queen Victoria, detailing the atrocities and pleading for the enforcement of international treaties.
But the geopolitical reality was that the European powers, while sympathetic in their rhetoric, were not willing to initiate a major war with Russia over the Caucasus.
The appeals went largely unanswered, aside from a few rogue British adventurers running guns.
Without international intervention, the final military collapse was inevitable. The organized resistance effectively ended on the 21st of May, 1864, at the Battle of Kubata.
High in the mountains near modern-day Krasnaya Polyana.
The Russian army held a massive military parade on the battlefield to celebrate total hegemony over the Caucasus.
What follows the military victory is a demographic catastrophe. The statistics provided in the sources are devastating.
The aftermath of the war resulted in the death or displacement of up to 97% of the entire Circassian population.
97% of a nation erased from its ancestral map.
The historical estimates state that between 600,000 and 2 million Circassians were killed during the century of warfare, through direct combat, forced starvation, and rampant disease.
The surviving population, numbering roughly 1.5 million people, was systematically expelled from the region.
The Russian strategy was to drive the survivors out of the mountains and down to the Black Sea coast.
This mass expulsion is known historically as muhajirism. It was enforced ruthlessly.
Mobile columns of Russian riflemen and Cossack cavalry swept through the remaining valleys, driving families from their homes, bringing the structures behind them, and forcing them on foot to the ports.
They were loaded onto overcrowded Ottoman and contracted merchant ships to be deported across the Black Sea to the Ottoman Empire.
The conditions on the beaches and on the ships were horrific. Disease wiped out tens of thousands before they even reached a foreign shore.
The academic sources and contemporary political analyses use the term genocide to describe the systematic mechanics of this event, the deliberate, orchestrated attempt to completely remove a specific ethnic group from a defined geographic space.
Circassia, as a sovereign geographic entity, was wiped off the political map of the world.
The valleys were resettled by Russian colonists, Cossacks, and other ethnic groups loyal to the Tsar.
But the Circassian people were not extinguished. The expulsion scattered them, but it did not destroy their identity.
Which brings us to the modern reality. Today, there are roughly 800,000 Circassians living in the historical homeland in the North Caucasus.
The administrative structure of that homeland, however, is deeply fragmented.
During the early Soviet era, policies were enacted that deliberately divided the remaining Adyghe population into separate administrative units.
Today, they are spread across the Republic of Adyghe, the Kabardino-Balkarian Republic, and the Karachi-Cherkess Republic, among others.
But the vast majority of the population, several million people, constitute a massive global diaspora.
They reside primarily in Turkey, which absorbed the bulk of the refugees in the 19th century, as well as in Jordan, Syria, and communities across Europe and North America.
When you look at the trajectory of this diaspora, it leads to a critical final thought regarding the resilience of culture and the mechanics of survival.
Stripped of their ancestral mountains, stripped of their powerful aristocratic structures, and stripped of the military role that defined them for centuries, You would expect complete assimilation into the host cultures.
But instead, they engaged in a profound cultural adaptation. Consider the concept that modern sociologists call the new cubs.
How does the unwritten constitution of a mountain warrior society function in a modern city, like Amman or Istanbul?
It adapts by retaining its core operating logic while changing its external expression.
The strict rituals regarding horsemanship or the physical positioning in a specific type of dwelling have simplified. But the spirit of the law, the Adyghe, remains the central pillar of identity.
The outward markers of status change, but the internal mechanisms do not.
It's exactly. Educational attainment and professional success have largely replaced martial prowess as the primary markers of status within the community.
But the fundamental values encoded in the Khabze, the absolute demand for interpersonal respect, the protection of the elderly, the commitment to the social health of the community over individual gain, and the deep, abiding sense of honor, those persist.
The moral code that evolved to dictate cavalry charges, to govern the complex etiquette of medieval courts, and to ensure survival against the overwhelming pressure of nomadic empires has successfully transitioned.
It is now the ultimate anchor for a stateless people fighting against the slow erosion of assimilation in a modern, globalized world.
The physical borders of their nation were erased from the map, but the internal framework holding the people together proved to be stronger than the geography.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.